to answer the questions and try to get into the specifics about the nature of these wounds and the questions that the vets were raising, he interrupted me and wouldn't let me finish.
Do you think, I haven't read the book, so I can't even come close to this, but do you think there's any chance that a man like John Kerry would try to figure out a way to have a self-inflicted wound to serve him later in politics?
I don't think, again, I think that's a mischaracterization of what they were saying. And if you look at each of the sections regarding each of the 3 Purple Hearts and the Silver Star, etc., it's not that he deliberately occasioned these wounds upon himself. It's that they were self-inflicted in specific instances and then inflated. And as they point out in the book, they don't think that there's anybody among the Swiftboat vets who had ever gotten a Purple Heart for a self-inflicted wound.
Is it Piasta, Iowa? Caller, are you there? Let's try it again. Piasta, Iowa. Could we get number 2 on, please? Number 2's not working, unfortunately. I'll have to come back to it. Let's go. Phones are not working at the moment, so we have to figure out a way to get to... Can you press them up downstairs? Can we get the Iowa call downstairs? Phones are locked up. Now, something's wrong with our phones, which is something we've been perpetually dealing with. I was accused this morning by a caller who was a John Kerry supporter of unfairly comparing the New York Times, which leads with this morning, and this issue, with the Washington Times, and accused of unfairly comparing a Brit Hume at Fox with a Gwen Ifill at PBS, as they're not in the same business, and one is legitimate media and the other is not. That's the impression I got. What is your take on that? How do you legitimize media, whether it's the Washington Times or the New York Times? Is there a difference between them as far as you're concerned?
No, they're both legitimate news outlets.
Well, the suggestion is made the Washington Times is a polemic of the right and the New York Times is a journalistic institution.
I think if anybody actually reads the Washington Times, reads their investigative reporters, they do groundbreaking work in a lot of areas, from defense to immigration to education to their local coverage of D.C. politics. Certainly their editorial pages and their commentary pages have a slant. I guess the difference is that the Washington Times maybe is more honest about the slant that it is on the editorial page and the commentary page versus the pretense of this Sorbonne-like, elite journalism at the New York Times.
Brooklyn, New York. Good morning, a Kerry supporter. Brooklyn, New York, are you there? Nope, our phones are completely gone now. Hopefully, we will have something available to people soon. Let me try it now. Is there anything there from Brooklyn, New York? Brooklyn, New York. Why don't we try to move to our backup phones if we could, if it's possible, because this will be a long 45 minutes, although I've got plenty of questions to ask you. But let me go back to that. Here is the Washington Times front page, and they chose to highlight on their front page, this is the 3rd day they've done it, the book. They are publishing excerpts from the book. And the New York Times this morning, first time they really dealt with this story in depth, they have decided, they've come out, Doug Brinkley talked to them independently and gave him a transcript from an interview that he did with Admiral Hoffman back in 2003 that's never been published. And their whole scenario, their article, goes through the process of talking to each of these people or ferreting through the story and coming up with a whole different slant than the Washington Times does.
Yeah. Well,
could you make a case that the Washington Times would be on George Bush's side, so they would go for him, and the New York Times would be on John Kerry's side, so they would publish news that would increase the positive story on John Kerry?
Well, which is fairer, a newspaper that actually publishes the excerpt from the book, so that readers can judge for themselves from the actual words that were written by the authors, or a story that simply filters it through a historian that clearly has a pro-Kerry slant, and a story whose agenda is clearly to nitpick and undermine the testimony of these veterans.
Here's an email from Palm Beach, Florida. Al in Palm Beach. Last night's interview with Michelle Malkin on Hardball was disgusting. Chris Matthews handled it just right by cutting her time short, and not allowing her to discuss her book. Kudos for Mr. Matthews and his journalistic integrity. I will take a break this morning while you interview her. She implied last night on Hardball that John Kerry shot himself while serving in Vietnam in order to enhance his political career with medals. Please challenge her on this outrageous statement. Just to more of what we've been talking about.
Right.
Are you glad you went on the show?
It was educational, and I learned firsthand just how desperate a lot of these Democrat Party water boys in the media really are. I had no vested interest in this story, and yet both Chris Matthews and one of his colleagues, Keith Olbermann, who trashed me on the air as well, following the Chris Matthews show on his own show, called me a, quote, idiot, unquote. Both of them have suggested somehow that I'm part of the conspiracy, that I was dispatched by the Swiftboat veterans to ply this new line about Kerry shooting himself. I was on there because I was booked to talk about my own book. I am not a Bush operative. I'm not a Swiftboats veterans operative. And anybody who could pick up a phone and call one of the producers who put me on the show would know that. And Olbermann could make a free phone call to one of those producers to check it out for himself before he airs scurrilous charges about me.
By the way, I was confused last night when I was watching. The screen was breaking up. They had some problems with their digital service, but they had on the screen all the time live. What time did you tape that, or did you go live at 7 o'clock last night?
I was there at 7:30.
So you were on
live. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were having some problem. Let me show the new numbers on the screen that we can get our folks involved here. It's 202-737-0001 for our George Bush supporters, 202-737-0002 for John Kerry supporters, and 202-737-0205. The phone lines crashed this morning. It's due to our wonderful computer system and software. Your book, In Defense of Internment, is what?
I make the case for quote-unquote racial profiling in World War II and the War on Terror. And what prompted the book was listening to critics of the Bush administration after September 11th, who've basically likened every homeland security measure that's been undertaken since the attacks to the quote-unquote Japanese-American internment. So everything from deporting illegals from the Middle East to subjecting temporary visa applicants from terror-sponsoring nations to heightened scrutiny, to the policies at Guantanamo Bay, has been likened to what happened during World War II. And the underlying premise of this invocation of the internment card is that these measures now, just as in World War II, were prompted solely or primarily by racism or wartime hysteria. And I look back at the past and provide evidence that that conventional view of the evacuation and relocation of ethnic Japanese, as well as the internment of 31,000 enemy aliens, had a clear military rationale and military necessity. And I give readers a lot of the information that the Roosevelt administration had on its hand. It's fascinating. Anybody who's a World War II buff or history buff is going to, I think, be delighted by the book, because there are a lot of interesting things that I've uncovered and put together. But more importantly, just in terms of relevance for today, if we can move on and learn the right lessons from World War II, I think it can help us wage a more effective war on militant Islamists today.
Michelle Malkin is the daughter of Philippine immigrants, born in Philadelphia, 1970, raised in southern New Jersey, is married and has 2 children, and went to Oberlin College.